So the name Norway itself, it comes from Norawick, Old Norse, right, meaning northern way.
That's it. And it originally referred to a coastal sea route, which tells you a lot already.
Exactly. It's like the sea and its northern location are baked right into the name. And even today, you have the two official names.
Norge in Buckmall and Norig in Nynorsk.
Yeah, reflecting that rich cultural and linguistic history.
It really does. Northern Way, it's a powerful starting point for understanding Norway's story, I think.
Absolutely. And, well, that's basically our mission for this deep dive. We want to really unpack what makes Norway, Norway. So we'll explore its geography, which is pretty dramatic. Its history, you know, with all the independence and union periods.
The people, how the society is structured, the governance.
Right. We're drawing heavily on the Wikipedia page for Norway for this, trying to pull out those, you know, surprising facts and key insights for you, the listener.
Yeah, the goal isn't just to list facts, but to kind of connect the dots, see how geography influenced history, how history shaped the people, that sort of thing.
Make it engaging, clear, avoid too much jargon.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dive into the land itself. Geography first.
Makes sense.
Right. So Norway sits on the western side of the Scandinavian Peninsula, and it stretches a long way north to south.
It really does. Latitude-wise, you're looking at 57 degrees north, which is, what, like the northern UK?
Roughly, yeah. All the way up to 81 degrees north, well inside the Arctic Circle.
And then east-west, it's between 4 degrees and 32 degrees east. That's a huge range.
It is, and that means, you know, a massive variety in climate and landscape.
Definitely. And it's got that classic long, narrow shape, less than 420 kilometers wide at its broadest point.
Which must have impacted internal communication and just how regions developed over time.
Oh, absolutely. Big challenges, but also opportunities, especially forcing people towards the sea.
Right. And speaking of the sea, that coastline, it's immense. Over 25,000 kilometers if you include all the fjords and islands.
Countless islands, islets, rocks. It's undeniably a maritime nation.
And the land borders. It shares a really long one with Sweden.
1,630 kilometers.
Wow. Then Finland, 736 kilometers, and a shorter border with Russia, about 196 kilometers. Historically significant, that one.
For sure. And those borders, along with the surrounding seas, the Norwegian Sea, Barents Sea, North Sea, have shaped its politics and economy for centuries.
From fishing right up to, well, oil and gas today.
Exactly. Those waters were pathways, sources of food, sources of wealth.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting geographically, the bits that aren't attached, the distant territories.
Ah, yes. Svalbard, first off, way up there in the Arctic Ocean.
Also known as Spitsbergen.
Yeah.
And Norway's sovereignty there was internationally recognized back in 1925, quite a statement of its Arctic presence.
It is. And Svalbard's fascinating, unique treaty status, extreme environment, research hub, potential resources.
Then there's Jan Mayen, kind of between Greenland and the Norwegian Sea.
Strategically important spot in the North Atlantic.
And even Bouvet Island, way, way down in the South Atlantic.
Uninhabited, but it shows Norway's historical claims and polar interests.
It really underscores a global reach, even to these remote spots. And then Antarctica. Norway has claims there too. Petersiron Island and Queen Maud Land.
Right, but it's important to remember the Antarctic Treaty from 1961.
Yeah, so under that treaty, and according to Norwegian law itself, these aren't technically part of Norway proper.
Exactly. It's more about demonstrating engagement, scientific interest, keeping a foothold under the treaty system, which freezes those sovereignty claims for now.
Right. Okay, climate. Despite being so far north, parts of Norway are surprisingly mild, especially the coast.
Yeah, you have the Gulf Stream and the prevailing westerly winds to thank for that.
Brings warmer water, more rain, makes it much more habitable than you'd expect at those latitudes.
The impact is huge. It's a massive thermal anomaly, basically. Crucial for settlement, farming, everything maritime.
Still get the 4 seasons on the mainland, obviously. Inland areas are colder, drier winters.
Far north is subarctic. Svalbard is full-on Arctic.
It's interesting the contrast between the wet, mild winters in the south and west versus the drier, colder east and north. And get this, the lowlands around Oslo usually have the warmest summers.
Makes sense.
But the southern coast actually gets the most sunny days. And apparently, Tromsø, way above the Arctic Circle, once logged 430 hours of sun in 1 month.
Wow. That really messes with the dark, frozen north stereotype, doesn't it?
It does. Shows those local variations.
It's a much more nuanced picture than people often think.
Okay, the physical landscape itself. Overwhelmingly mountainous.
Yeah, it's like a vast ancient plateau, mostly gneiss and granite,
Kind of undulating rolling highlands is the overall impression.
with those deep fjords cutting into the west and north coasts and broader valleys more to the east.
Rounded mountain forms are common too. How did this terrain impact settlement? Must have been tough.
Incredibly tough for inland travel and communication. It naturally fragmented communities, pushed them towards the coast.
Fostered strong regional identities, I imagine.
Definitely. And a reliance on boats for centuries.
The numbers are pretty stark. About 39,000 square kilometers is above 1,000 meters. Another 91,000 between 500 and 1,000.
Average elevation around 490 meters.
And compare that to arable land, just 2,400 square kilometers.
Tiny. Versus huge areas of uninhabited mountains, bogs, 235,000 square kilometers of bogs, and 7,000 square kilometers of glaciers.
It really shows how much of the country is wild. How did that shape the economy?
Well, with so little farmland, traditional agriculture had limits. It pushed Norway towards the sea, fishing, shipping, and later, timber, hydropower, and of course, oil and gas. The landscape basically dictated the economic path.
Right. Okay, let's take a regional tour starting way up north. Finnmark borders Russia.
Eastern Finnmark, mostly rounded hills, highlands reaching the Barents Sea.
But inland, you get valleys like the Tana River Valley, surprisingly green in summer.
Yeah, almost a microclimate. But those long, harsh winters really restrict farming. It's a land of extremes.
The Tana Valley is important culturally too, isn't it, for the Sami people?
Hugely important. A vital artery economically and culturally.
West of North Cape, the mountains change. Flatter tops, dropping steeply to the sea.
200 to 400 meters straight down sometimes.
And big rivers like the Alta, famous for salmon.
And the land around it is fertile enough for rye, the northernmost rye cultivation, which is pretty amazing.
And the coast changes too. East Finnmark has open fjords, but west of North Cape.
You get the Skjærgård, that protective maze of islands. Big ones, tiny ones, the Skjær or Skerries.
Provides shelter. You also have the wide Alta Fjord and the long Lyngen Fjord.
Right, and Lyngen is flanked by these impressive alpine peaks, up to 1,500, 2,000 meters, marks the edge of the Finnmark Plateau. How does that sheltered coast compare to the open fjords further east for communities?
Well, the Skjærgård offers crucial protection for settlements, fishing boats, creates different marine habitats too, reflects different geology, different wave action over time, leads to different settlement patterns, different ways of using resources.
And Lyngen, with those dramatic mountains behind it, must foster a unique mix of coastal and mountain life.
Moving south then, into Nordland, the northern country. It starts around Lyngen.
The political borders follow the geography pretty closely there. Mountains generally 1,000 to 1,800 meters.
Highest peak is Sulitjelma, right on the Swedish border.
1,880 meters, and it has a big glacier on it. Classic mountainous Norway image.
Definitely. High peaks near Sweden, deep fjords cutting in, loads of islands offshore, big contrasts.
Shaped its history, economy, where people live.
And near the coast in Nordland, there's the Svartisen Glacier.
Huge, 65 kilometers long, over 1,000 square kilometers, reaches almost 1,100 meters high.
But only the western slope is in Norway.
Yeah, the eastern side goes over the ridge into Sweden, and the border itself gets really close to the sea inlets there.
Like 20, 30 kilometers, even 15 kilometers in one spot.
Wow. Key fjords there include Balsfjord, Malengen, Afoten, Salten, Rada, Vefsn.
And those offshore islands, mostly large, mountainous, Vesterålen, and the Lofoten Islands.
The Lofotens especially, stretching way out, famous for their scenery. How important were those islands historically?
Absolutely vital, mainly because of the fishing grounds around them, especially cod.
Right. The cod fisheries fueled settlements, supported trade for centuries, shaped the whole culture out there, the architecture.
And now, tourism too, with those mountains rising straight from the sea.
Iconic.
Okay, south of Vestfjord, the mainland starts to widen out a bit. Mountains get lower towards Naundalfjord.
Which brings us into Trøndelag, around Trondheimsfjord.
Fertile, well-cultivated area, historically the core of Norway, right?
Huge historical significance. Early seat of power, cradle of the culture. The fertile plains allowed for early farming, population growth.
Though it still has a valley character, apparently. And the description says the western side of the fjord is less appealing.
Interesting detail. Could be terrain, weather exposure, maybe just historical land use.
Around 63 degrees north, near Røros, the mountain town at 600 meters, the highlands kind of break up.
Yeah, you get these big mountain ranges running south between Norway and Sweden, between the Dalelv and Klarelv rivers.
They curve southwest towards the coast. And this whole section, up to Lake Lejevrokvanda, is broadly called Dovrefjell.
Though locals often mean just the bit crossed by the Oslo-Trondheim road.
The eastern part is lower, less rugged than the west. and the west is where you find Snøhetta.
200 and 286 meters. Used to be thought of as Norway's highest.
Dovrefjell's northern part is substantial, cut by the Orkdal and Galdal valleys.
And west of Snøhetta, the Driva River carves out Sandal Valley. That's the transition to the western coastal terrain.
And here, the main mountain range takes a sharp turn south, becoming Langsellet.
Right, and it sends out this huge western spur, 209 kilometers long, creating this incredibly scenic, rugged area. Sounds complex.
It is. Dovrefjell was historically a major barrier physically and psychologically. Influenced travel, regional identity. Snøhetta's height shows the scale, and that turn south by Langsellet created the deep valleys and high peaks that define the western fjords.
South of Trondheimsfjord, you get Stangviksfjord and Sundalsfjord.
Leading inland to the Romsdalsfjord, famous for alpine scenery.
And the Rama River flows through the Romsdal Valley itself. Very rugged.
Home to peaks like Trolltind and Romsdalshorn. 1,600, 1,900 meters. Sounds like a climber's paradise.
It is. Renowned for dramatic, challenging terrain, iconic peaks, spectacular scenery.
Then comes the Sunnmøre Fjord system. Intricate, complex, almost surrounded by high mountains, 1,500 to 2,300 meters.
And the coast and islands there are described as distinctly wild.
South of that is Nordfjord, separated by a long mountain range ending at Stad Cape. What's special about Stad Cape?
It's very exposed, known for rough weather, juts right out, a major navigational challenge historically.
The side inlets of Nordfjord are rugged too, but Førdefjord and Dalsfjord further south are less dramatic.
Yeah, probably reflects variations in geology and glacial impact.
Okay, then we reach the big one, Sognefjord, named after the Son region.
And within Son, you find Norway's highest and wildest mountains, Jotunheimen.
Home of the giants. Covers about 15,000 square kilometers. Average plateau height is nearly 1,300 meters.
Snowline's around 1,400 meters, so the peaks themselves might be too steep for permanent snow, but glaciers Jökulr sow the crevices and gentler slopes.
It's basically uninhabited mountain wilderness, over 60 peaks above 2,000 meters.
Most famously, Galdhøpiggen, 2,469 meter, and Glittertind, up to 2,464 meters with its ice cap, highest in northern Europe.
Surrounded by loads of other high, rocky summits, home of the giants seems about right. How has Jotunheimen influenced Norwegian identity?
Profoundly. Its sheer scale and majesty feature heavily in folklore, myths, national romanticism. It symbolizes untamed nature, strength, resilience qualities often linked to the Norwegian character. It's been a backdrop for countless stories, art, really cemented in the national consciousness.
In western Jotunheimen, there's the Hurrengane Range, peaks up to 2,400 meters.
And valleys cut into it from Sognefjord, like a rall.
Described as extremely wild, rocky, and the risk of avalanches was, and probably still is, constant. Sounds tough.
It is. Hurrengane is some of the most rugged terrain in Jotunheimen. Those steep glacial valleys like Ardal are definitely avalanche-prone, shows the power and danger of nature there. Impacts where people can live, what they can build.
West of Jotunheimen, between Sunnfjord and Nordfjord, lies the Jostedalsbreen Glacier.
Massive ice sheet, mainland Europe's largest, right?
Yep, 90 kilometers long, 80 kilometers wide, 1,600 square kilometers, reaches 1,600 meters high.
But the amazing thing is how low its edges come down.
Only 130 meters above sea level, and just 3 kilometers from the sea. That's incredible.
And numerous other glaciers fill the valleys nearby, too. What's the significance of a glacier getting so close to the sea?
Well, it creates a unique environment. Interactions between ice and the marine ecosystem, influences on local climate, water runoff, historically a huge barrier to travel too.
Contributed to that regional isolation we talked about.
And now, of course, a major tourist draw and a focus for climate change research.
Absolutely.
South of Jotunheimen is the Filefjell mountain plateau, high peaks rising above it.
And Sognefjord branches into smaller inlets there. Nærfjord, Fjellandsfjord, Listerfjord, known for their beauty.
Majestic, yeah. Sounds very picturesque.
Filefjell acts as a watershed, a transition zone, and those smaller fjords off Sognefjord often have a more intimate beauty. Steep cliffs, calm waters, great for scenic cruises.
South of Sognefjord, the mountainous region continues. Fertile Foss area inland, Hardangerfjord to the south.
The Hardanger region along the fjord is similar in character to Son.
And inland from there, you hit the Hardangervidda, that huge flat plateau.
Bounded by the Hardanger Jökuln Glacier and the Hallingskarven Cliffs. Vast area, 12,000 to 15,000 sekilometers, Europe's largest high mountain plateau.
A flat plateau in such a mountainous country is quite a contrast. How was it used historically?
Mainly for reindeer grazing and as a route for seasonal migrations. Its flatness made it more accessible for certain travel. supported a unique ecosystem adapted to the harsh conditions.
Still vital for wild reindeer today and popular for hiking.
Right.
West of Hardanger Fjord on a peninsula sits the Fjords Glacier.
60 kilometers long, up to 46 kilometers wide, covers 150 kilometers long, offers amazing views from the sea.
Highest points reach 1,654 meters. The ice limit varies, 300 to 1,000 meters. Very striking.
Yeah, Fjordfauna is really prominent. Its location on that flat-topped plateau makes its size obvious, influences local weather, water resources too.
Beyond these fjords, the island chain continues, sheltering the Ryfylke region south of Hardanger.
Ryfylke is generally lower than Hardanger, but it has Lysefjord, home of Preikestolen, Pulpit Rock.
And apparently, one of Norway's most treacherous reefs is off that coast. Interesting contrast. Lower land, dangerous sea.
Shows the coastal diversity. Not all towering cliffs, but still raw ocean power and navigational challenges.
After Bemlefjord, the landscape changes again. The islands stop, and the open sea hits the coast of Jæren directly.
Unprotected. Jæren and the Lister region that follows are different long, narrow plains, lower inland mountains.
Mostly barren valleys, except for the long Setesdal Valley with the Otra River.
Which starts way back south of Hardangervidda.
And Lindesnes, Norway's southernmost point, is down there. That flat, open coast must mean a different lifestyle.
Completely different from the fjords, more conducive to farming in parts, though still facing the climate challenges. Setesdal Valley was an important inland route with its own unique culture, and Lindesnes is symbolic and historically key for navigation.
East of Lindesnes, the islands reappear. Mountains stay low and bear the higher, none over 1,500 meters.
Gradually, these transition into the Telemark Mountains, more broken terrain, complex peaks.
With the isolated Gausta Mountain standing out, like a cone, 1,890 meters.
And big valleys between the mountains filled with rivers and lakes, like the Mona River forming the Yukon waterfall.
245 feet high. Telemark sounds more varied, maybe less imposing than the West.
Yeah, more undulating. Lower mountains, forests, lots of lakes and rivers, important for timber, transport, early industry. Gausta is a landmark, and Yukon waterfall wasn't just scenic, it powered industry.
Beyond Telemark, 5 major valleys drain into Oslofjord. Numedal, Logan River, Hallingdal, Valdres, Bygna River, Gudbrandsdalen, and Esterdalen.
Esterdalen, forming the border with Sweden, all start in the highlands, narrow at the source, widening downstream.
And this leads to those traditional divisions.
Halvstilske Norge.
Eastern, Sendefjyllandske Norge, southern.
Contrasting with the older Nordfjordsky northern and Vestfjordsky western divisions, all based on landscape.
Must have had a lasting impact on regional cultures.
Definitely. Those eastern valleys were crucial corridors, settlement, farming, communication linking the highlands to the Oslofjord region. The divisions reflect how geography shaped distinct regional characters, dialects, building styles, customs.
In southern mountain Norway, the rivers often form big lakes. Longest river is the Glomma in Esterdalen.
And Lake Mjøsa is the prime example, largest lake in eastern Norway.
117 kilometers long, 364 square kilometers. Receives the Logan from Gudbrandsdalen, drains into the Glomma via the Vorma.
Shores are partly low and fertile, especially Hedmarken on the southeast side.
These lakes and rivers must have been vital transport routes, resource hubs.
Absolutely. Mjøsa was key for transport, fishing, farming. The fertile plains supported big farming communities.
And waterfalls everywhere. Sarfossen on the Glomma is 20 meters.
Respectable, but tiny compared to some in Telemark and the west. Vedesfossen, Vuringsfossen, Ringadalsfossen, plunging hundreds of meters.
Creates spectacular scenery, but also power.
Exactly. All those waterfalls are why hydropower became so central to Norway's energy system, a direct result of the terrain and the water.
Okay, so we've covered the bones of the country, the geography. Let's move on to the story of the people. Prehistory first.
Sounds good. After the last ice age retreated, early Mesolithic, hunter-gatherers moved in.
The Fosna and Kamsa cultures, named after archaeological sites.
Right. And interestingly, the climate back then was quite good. Post-glacial rebound, fertile coasts.
Making it potentially one of the more densely populated areas in northern Europe for hunter-gatherers at the time. That's surprising.
It is. The sea would have been incredibly rich. The newly exposed land offered hunting, foraging. It could support more people than you might think.
Then to the Neolithic, we see the funnel beaker culture in the south.
Megalithic? Maybe pre-Indo-European.
And the pit coneware culture in the east, thought to be Finno-Ugric.
Suggests different origins, different influences even back then.
Exactly. Norway wasn't monolithic. Different groups, different traditions, different migration routes. Complex from the start.
Moving into ancient history. The ancestors of modern Norwegians are seen as an ancient Germanic tribe, related to Danes, Swedes, Jutes, Angles. Gradually pushed Finnic tribes further north, though the exact settlement process north to south, south to north, multiple waves is a bit murky.
Earliest settlements dated around 10,000, 9,000 years ago. Komsa in Finnmark, Fasna in Nordmøre, those hunter-gatherer sites.
Right. And according to later sagas, these early Norwegians occupied the area from the southern Vik Bay up to Trondheim, or Nidaros as it was called.
But like other early Germanic groups, no central political structure initially.
Divided into maybe 20, 30 focal peoples, each with its own king or jarl.
But they had assemblies, right? The thing.
Yes. Several folkers would join for a common thing at specific locations. All free members could attend, but decisions were mainly by representatives chosen by the kings.
Forming a higher assembly or court. Those dependent on the king were usually excluded from representing. That early focus on assemblies seems key for later politics.
It's foundational. An early form of participatory governance, local decision-making, that really persisted. Even kings were subject to the thing, which shows a certain balance of power.
Over time, these coalesced into 4 larger districts with their own things, laws, customs.
Frostating north of Sognefjord, Gulating in the southwest, and the things of Opland and Vik inland in east-south.
Though Opland and Vik initially met together at Eidsading, before Vik split off.
And within the Folker, you had subdivisions into Herod, or hundreds, led by a herser.
Hereditary position.
Yeah.
Responsible for civil and religious matters locally.
Yeah. And the kings, often called Yngling kings, supposedly had divine lineage. They represented the Felk externally, led in war.
But their power wasn't absolute, limited by personal influence, land ownership.
Exactly. The big decisions still often rested with the people at the thing. Quite decentralized compared to developing monarchies elsewhere in Europe then.
Free farmers paid the king a vira like a compensation if they broke the peace, and gave voluntary gifts.
Right, and interestingly, if a king acted unjustly, violence instead of law.
They'd circulate a symbolic arrow, signaling he should be caught, even killed.
Or banished if that failed. Strong checks on power.
And illegitimate children, if parentage was proven by ordeal, had equal inheritance rights to the throne.
Wow.
Shows a strong emphasis on law, even for monarchs, and mechanisms for accountability. A different approach to succession, too.
Society was basically 2 free classes, nobles and free farmers' peasants.
Plus, enslaved people, mostly captives, though apparently not treated too harshly generally.
But not rigid castes. Farming was respectable. Sometimes serving the king was even seen as demeaning.
Yeah, imposed as punishment sometimes. Shows the value placed on land ownership, personal freedom.
The king was the biggest landowner, managed estates through armiter.
And had his bodyguard the herdmen. Free men, but dependent on the king. Warriors, raiders.
Culture valued heroism, belief in fate, Odin granting victory. Seems quite fluid socially.
Yes, while hierarchical, the esteem for farming and the potential negativity around royal service suggests a society where land and freedom were key. The herdmen were important for consolidating royal power later on.
Which brings us neatly to the Viking Age, driven by poor soil, desire for glory, wealth. Raids, starting in the 8th century, put Norway on the European map, you could say.
A huge turning point.
Definitely. A period of massive expansion, trade, raiding, conquest. Changed Norway internally, too.
As larger kingdoms formed in Norway in the late 9th century and freedoms were reduced, even more people took to the seas.
Sometimes kings themselves led expeditions. Princes leading raids, sea kings were highly regarded.
Historians often see 2 phases, right? Early small raids, returning home.
And later, larger armies, staying over winter, building forts, settling permanently.
That second phase started earlier in some places. Ireland around 835, the Loire. England and the Seine by 851.
Exactly. The shift from raiding to settlement had huge long-term impacts across Europe. Normandy, the British Isles, Eastern Europe.
And Norwegians even reached Byzantium Miklagard, they called it.
Yeah.
Drawn by the wealth of Constantinople.
Incredible reach.
By the end of the 9th century, Norway itself was unified into a single kingdom. It gives us a more continuous story from then on.
Started in Vesterfield on the western Vik shore, descendants of Uppsala kings.
Halvdan the Black expanded his territory through family ties and conquest. Around the bay, inland to Lake Mjøsen.
Died young, left his son Harald Fairhair, only 10 years old, around 860 AD.
Harald continued his father's work, unifying Norway by subduing local jarls and kings.
But many chieftains resisted, didn't want to submit to someone they saw as an equal. Lots were banished, sailed off to find new lands.
The last holdouts were south of Sognefjord. They raised a big army, but Harald won decisively at the Battle of Hafrsfjord in 872.
Seen as the key moment in unification.
Harald's reign brought big changes. Many emigrated, unhappy with lost freedoms: Iceland, Shetland, Hebrides, Orkneys.
And raided back from there. Until Harald defeated them too, put Norwegian jarls in charge of the islands.
But towards the end of his life, he divided the kingdom among his sons, undoing his own work.
16 kingdoms in total. He named his eldest, Eric Bloodaxe, as senior king, hoping to keep it unified.
But Eric tried to take forceful control even before Harald died, earned his nickname slaughtering his brothers. Harsh rule caused a backlash.
Then, the year Harald died, 934 AD, his youngest son Hakon the Good returned.
Born to a slave, raised in England at Ethelstan's court.
He promised the peasants their old rights back, return of lands. They chose him as king. Eric fled.
Hakon kept his promises. But having been baptized in England, he tried to introduce Christianity.
Faced huge resistance. Peasants insisted on pagan rituals, nearly caused a major conflict.
Hakon died in battle at Fitjar. Power went to Eric Bloodaxe's son, Harald II, then Danish influence grew. A messy period, even after unification.
Unification was complex, violent. Division, attempts at Christianization just led to more instability. The immigration to Iceland is key preserved Old Norse language and culture that might have faded in Norway.
After Hakon, kings like Olaf the Strigvason, 9995-1000, and Olaf II the Fat, 1015-1028, pushed Christianization again. Still lots of resistance.
Olaf Tryggvason became a popular hero figure. Olaf II, later Saint Olaf, patron saint. He was Harald Fairhair's great-great-grandson.
He managed to unite all of Norway, rebuilt Nidaros, Trondheim as the capital, really pushed Christianity through.
Resistance was largely suppressed under him. He reformed laws along Christian lines, created church ordinances,
forced powerful families to submit, abolished hereditary titles like Lenderman and Hersir. Even the Jarl title changed, became the king's advisor.
Before that, Jarls often challenged kings, especially during minorities.
Neighboring king Sweden, Denmark, kept trying to undermine him.
The Swedish king was forced by his own people to make peace, even gave Olaf his daughter. But Knud of Denmark constantly stirred up trouble.
Olaf attacked Denmark while Knud was in Rome, but Knud drove him out, then sailed to Norway.
The Norwegians, resenting Olaf's increasingly autocratic rule, sided with Knud. Olaf was exiled to Kavarusses.
Returned in 1029 with an army, but was outnumbered and killed at the Battle of Stiklestad.
Knud made his son Svein regent, but Danish rule was oppressive. Norwegians started regretting Olaf.
The same men who'd opposed Olaf brought his young son Magnus back from Kiev, made him king. Svein fled.
Treaty made. Magnus would also become king of Denmark when Harthacnut died, which he did.
He made Svein his regent in Denmark, but Svein rebelled. Magnus won battles, but died in 1047 after a victory.
His successor, Harald III Hardrada, fought constantly with the Danes, known as the Northern Lightning.
Got fixated on conquering England, but died fighting Harold Godwinson at Stamford Bridge in 1066.
Then came Olaf the Quiet, 27 years of peace, prosperity, a welcome break.
After him, division again, civil wars.
Yeah.
Until Magnus Barefoot reunited the country.
He led expeditions abroad. Hebrides, Orkney, Isle of Man, died in Ireland in 1103.
Succeeded by his sons, Eirik and Sigurd. Eirik was peaceful, wise ruler. Sigurd was more adventurous.
Led a crusade to the Holy Land, 1107-1111, pledged to establish a bishopric and tithing in Norway, which he did.
After Sigurd died in 1130, a long period of civil wars began again. Kingdom split, reunited, split again.
And the clergy skillfully used this chaos to expand their power and rights. Royal authority weakened significantly.
Norwegian royal power never got as strong as elsewhere in Europe anyway, because the people fiercely defended their rights.
The aristocracy distanced itself from the common people, allied with the clergy, trying to consolidate power.
In 1161, a papal legate visited, enforced priestly celibacy, other reforms, anointed the young Magnus V as king in Bergen.
Magnus V was descended from Harald Fairhair through his mother. By consecrating his claim, the church opened the door for more claims through female lines.
In 1174, urged by Archbishop Eystein, Magnus issued the Golden Seal Charter, gave the clergy huge rights.
Magnus declared himself king by God's grace, promised tithes, gave up involvement in choosing bishops, gave the archbishop huge influence over royal succession.
Effectively replacing election by popular assembly with clerical influence in coronation. Claimed the king held Norway as a fief from St. Olaf.
The people weren't having it. revolted under Eystein Mæhle, claiming descent from a previous king.
Led to a century-long struggle. Birchlegs, Birkbeiners, opposing clergy power, defending people's rights, versus the Krugermen, Beglers representing the clergy.
Caused massive upheaval. The Birkbeiners were losing until Sverrir Sigurdsson took charge.
Former priest, claimed to be son of King Sigurd Mund. He defeated Magnus in 1184, became king.
His reign is seen as a new era. Weakened clergy and aristocracy, established more democratic principles, appointed new officials loyal to him, reduced the power of old titles.
Challenged the church, saying the king got authority directly from God. The clergy revolted, Pope Innocent III excommunicated him, bishops left Norway. But Sverrir held firm.
Didn't fully centralize power due to constant conflict. The struggle continued after his death in 1202.
Until Sverrir's grandson, Håkon IV, was recognized by both sides in Bergen. Relative peace followed.
Håkon IV didn't recognize the Golden Seal Charter, but mediated between peasants and clergy, gave the clergy independence in jurisdiction, freedom from military service for church lands.
In return, the clergy helped him conquer most of Iceland and Greenland.
His son, Magnus VI, took the throne in 1263, not by election, but by his father's will. Håkon had secured allegiance and passed a succession law in 1257 to prevent fragmentation and remove bishop influence.
Magnus focused on peace, legal reforms, earned the name lawmender, a god of Pater, created a common law code for the whole kingdom, drawing on old regional laws.
Made punishments less severe, clearer succession rules ending royal elections, strengthened royal officials and the king's own authority, a long, complex period, constant power struggles.
Absolutely. From Harald Fairhair's unification through the Viking Age, the Civil Wars, you see the gradual emergence of a kingdom, a national identity. That push and pull between the king, church, aristocracy, and the people was constant. Magnus VI's reforms were a huge step towards stability. King Håkon V the Saint died in 1319. He'd abolished the title of lenderman entirely, without much fuss.
They'd become just large landowners, not really leaders of the people anymore.
So Norway remained a country of mostly small, independent farmers.
Håkon V had no male heirs. His grandson, through his mother, was the young Swedish king Magnus Eriksson.
So the Norwegian assembly elected Magnus Eriksson as their king too. The throne passed to the Swedish line.
But both countries kept their own laws, their own councils. Norway had 4 local councils, Orthing, and 1 common one, usually meeting in Bergen. Cities had self-government too, a big shift towards Sweden.
Abolishing the lendermen further weakened the old aristocracy, solidified the farmers' position. But that personal union with Sweden under Magnus Eriksson started a long period where Norway's fate got tied up with its neighbors, often with Sweden dominant. From 1319 onwards, Norwegian history is tangled with Denmark and Sweden, less independent.
Drawn into Sweden's orbit, including wars with the Hanseatic League, which hurt Norwegian trade by strengthening the League's grip.
Power in Norway fell to royal officials. No strong native aristocracy or national assembly to counter them, though farmers and cities kept some freedoms.
Then the Black Death hit in 1349, devastating, killed over a third of the population.
Must have been huge, demographically, economically.
Catastrophic across Europe, Norway included. Massive population loss probably led to upheaval, maybe weakened Norway's position in the Union further. Lack of strong native institutions made it more reliant on Swedish leadership in the crisis.
Norwegians really wanted their king present. In 1350, Magnus sent his younger son Håkon, who'd already been designated King of Norway back in 1343.
Then, in 1376, the Danish royal line died out. The Danish council chose Olaf, son of Norway's King Håkon Magnusson, and his Danish wife Margaret as their king. Margaret became regent.
The Hanseatic League recognized him too. When Håkon Magnusson died in 1380, Margaret became Norwegian regent as well, though her power was initially limited.
Olaf died young in 1387. Both Danish and Norwegian assemblies elected Margaret as queen. Then in 1388, the Swedish nobles elected her too.
All 3 Scandinavian kingdoms under one ruler. The Kalmar Union begins.
Margaret's political skill and the circumstances led to this unprecedented union. Looked promising for stability, but tensions would arise, especially for Norway.
Soon after the Swedes elected Margaret, the Norwegians recognized her sister's grandson, Eric of Pomerania, as their king.
7 years later, 1396, Denmark and Sweden elected Eric too, pledging peace between the states.
Margaret wanted to solidify this, convene the councils of all 3 kingdoms in Kalmar in 1397.
Drew up the Kalmar Union Treaty. 1 king, hereditary succession from Eric's line, mutual defense, common foreign policy. But each kingdom kept its own laws.
Sounds okay on paper, but didn't bring much benefit. They got dragged into the ruling dynasty's expansionism.
Norway made sacrifices for foreign interests, paid heavy taxes for wars not its own. Kings were often absent.
Foreign officials oppressed the people, drained resources, forced devalued coinage. Norwegians kept asking for a viceroy if the king couldn't be there.
Lacking strong native institutions, they needed royal attention, but pleas were ignored.
In 1420, they complained, ruled by foreign, cruel bailiffs, coinage chaos, no viceroy, not even a seal.
Led to growing hostility towards Pomeranian and Wittelsbach rule. Disturbances erupted as people resisted foreign officials, defended local laws. The union bred resentment in Norway.
Yeah, while the idea of unity had appeal, the reality, especially under absentee kings and Danish dominance, led to dissatisfaction, desire for more autonomy. Unrest in Denmark eventually let Norwegians assert more independence. The union became more personal, equal.
Each state kept its name, laws, native officials, separate finances.
The Swedish king Karl Knutsson, elected by Norway in 1449, later gave up his claim in 1457 to the Danish king Christian I.
Agreed. Norway would always share a king with Denmark. Election in Halmstad, Christian I's sons prioritized.
So from then until 1814, Norway and Denmark shared kings, a shift from the broader Kalmar Union to a closer but still unequal tie with Denmark.
Norway navigating complex politics, moving from the Scandinavian Union to a more direct, if still asymmetrical, relationship with Denmark, retained some governance, but fate increasingly tied to Danish interests.
Throughout the 15th century, until 1536 when autonomy was really cut, Norwegians kept resisting encroachments, often recognized Danish kings only after protests.
A big outrage was Christian I pledging Orkney and Shetland to Scotland in 1468 as dowry security. Without consulting Norway, never redeemed, still British today.
Armed uprisings against Danish rule were frequent. Losing those islands must have stung national pride.
It was a significant loss, strategically and symbolically, showed their weakened position. The continued resistance shows persistent Norwegian national feeling despite Danish dominance.
The Kalmar Union basically ended in 1536. The Danish Riksdag, after kicking out Christian II, declared Norway a subordinate province of Denmark, not an equal partner.
Separate Norwegian assembly, army, navy, finances all abolished. Supreme Norwegian court dissolved. Big decisions made in Copenhagen by Danish judges, bishops appointed there, young Norwegians educated there for careers.
Norwegian soldiers and sailors filled Danish ranks. Governance by Danish officials, Volgan, appointed from Copenhagen, acting quite independently.
The only thing the Danes hesitated to touch was the peasants' land rights, the odelsret. A huge shift. Norway reduced to a dependency.
A crucial turning point. Dismantling institutions, centralizing power in Copenhagen had profound, mostly negative, consequences for Norway's development for centuries. Loss of political independence really depressed Norway's development. Stagnation, especially after the Reformation was forced on them.
Norwegian trade suffered under the Hanseatic League. Little industrial development. Finances and population hit by wars with Sweden, who often ravaged border areas.
And Sweden annexed 3 provinces, Jämtland, Härjedalen, Bohuslän.
Intellectual life declined sharply, too. Copying old manuscripts stopped. One writer even suggested Norwegians forgot how to read, often seen as a low point.
You're right. The Danish dominance after 1536 often meant hardship, cultural stagnation. Suppressing institutions, focus on Copenhagen hindered development, left it vulnerable, especially to Sweden. But while Danish rule was bad in many ways, it also inadvertently helped in others, strengthened democratic principles locally.
Last bits of feudalism vanished in the 17th century. No new native aristocracy emerged. No royal court in Norway, no resident king. Danish officials, always changing, couldn't put down roots.
After Hanseatic dominance ended in 1613, Norwegian trade grew significantly. Shipping, fishing, timber too.
Population increased considerably, especially in towns, boosting their prosperity. Seeds of future growth, even during subjugation.
An important nuance. While political power was in Denmark, local self-governance and growth in key sectors laid groundwork for Norway's resurgence. Lack of a strong aristocracy also meant a different social structure than many European countries. Late 18th century, Norway suffered during Denmark's wars with England. Nationalism, desire for freedom reawakened.
British blockade often cut communication between Denmark and Norway for years. Might have separated then, if not for the popular governor, Prince Christian August.
After he died suddenly in 1809, the independence idea gained steam. A society for Norway's welfare was formed, pushed for it.
And in 1811, after Danish resistance, they managed to found the University of Christiania, Oslo. Crucial center for Norwegian culture. less reliance on Copenhagen.
Nationalism really surged when they learned Danish King Frederick VI ceded Norway to Sweden in the Treaty of Kiel, 1814, after losing a war. That treaty lit the fuse.
The Napoleonic Wars and Denmark backing the losing side created the opportunity for Norwegian aspirations to resurface. The university was vital for fostering a distinct Norwegian identity.
Now, the Treaty of Kiel itself, it said, Norway should belong to the King of Sweden, united with Sweden, govern Norway as an independent state according to its own laws, liberties, rights, and privileges.
But Norwegian historians always stressed Denmark had no right to cede Norway. They saw it as an equal partnership. The Danish king ruled by Norwegian law, not permission.
So he couldn't just transfer sovereignty without Norway's consent.
Exactly. From the Norwegian view, all he could do was abdicate the Norwegian throne, letting Norway decide its own future.
So based on that, Norwegians strongly opposed Kiel. They entered the personal union with Sweden in 1814, but not as a conquered territory.
That interpretation is absolutely key. It provided the legal and moral basis for resisting Swedish rule and asserting self-determination.
The ruler in Norway then was Prince Christian Frederick, young, energetic.
Convinced Norwegians would resist becoming a Swedish province, he convened top officials, presented the treaty, declared himself regent.
Called for elections for a constituent assembly at Eidsvoll to draft a new constitution.
Troops and civil guards swore oaths to defend independence, repeated by people in churches.
Elections held, assembly met April 10th, a committee drafted a constitution led by Falsen, adopted by the full assembly.
Key points: Norway free, independent, indivisible, legislative power to the people via representatives, reps control taxes, king declares war peace, separate judiciary, freedom of press.
Evangelical Lutheran state religion, but religious freedom otherwise, except Jesuits, monastic orders, Jews still barred. King grants orders, but no hereditary titles, step towards abolishing nobility.
King gets suspensive veto, not absolute. Can't accept other crowns without extorting consent. 23rds. Must reside in Norway.
May 19, 1814. Christian Frederick, unanimously elected King of Norway.
Sweden didn't accept this. Mobilized the army. Diplomacy failed. Norwegian military leadership was inexperienced. Confidence wavered. Suspicion of betrayal.
But the Swedish Crown Prince, Karl Johan, was cautious. Agreed to negotiate directly with Norway as an independent nation.
Offer accepted. Maritime Convention signed August 14th. Treaty of Kiel annulled by Sweden itself.
King Christian convened the Storting October 7th. Reality sank and couldn't sustain a long war. Union seemed necessary.
Christian renounced power, released Norway from its oath. Swedish commissioners came to negotiate union terms, told to be flexible.
Agreement reached. Norway, a free, independent kingdom, united with Sweden via common king. Autonomous internally, equal influence in common matters.
Including foreign relations. Separate foreign admin, but joint decisions in a joint council with equal influence. Norway gets reps in Swedish council for key Norwegian matters.
Only after Sweden agreed to Norway's terms did the Storting accept Christian's abdication and elect Sweden's Karl III as constitutional king of Norway, based on the Norwegian constitution, not Kiel.
Crown Prince delivered the king's oath to govern by Norway's constitution. Storting members swore allegiance. President hoped the union would bring mutual benefit. Pivotal events.
Indeed. Adopting that progressive constitution at Eidsvoll, driven by desire for self-determination, was remarkable. The union formed, but crucially, on the basis of Norway's independent status and constitution, not just absorbed. That constitution became the cornerstone for the ongoing struggle within the union. But hopes for harmony faded. Sweden wanted closer integration. Norway fiercely guarded its independence.
Initial Swedish optimism soured as Norway asserted itself.
First clash, 1815. Storting abolishes nobility. King Karl Johan opposed it fiercely.
But the law passed 3 times, became binding without royal sanction. King was furious.
Threats followed, letters, decrees, attempts to restrict press freedom, hints of foreign intervention. But Norway's reps stood firm.
King proposed restrictive constitutional amendments in 1824, all rejected by the Storting.
External representation was another headache. Compromise in 1836. Norwegian council member attends diplomatic discussions, can give opinion on Norwegian matters, but vote isn't decisive. Satisfied nobody.
Union committees convened to revise the Act of Union, met resistance in the Storting.
Earlier, the July Revolution in France had boosted democratic hopes in Norway. Last land tax, abolished 1836, Rural self-governance reformed 1838.
Government tried to get absolute veto instead of suspensive in 1839. Rejected. Storting restricted king's right to grant citizenship too.
In 1842, Storting asserted royal sanction wasn't needed for naturalizing foreigners.
Then the stadtholder issue flared up in the 1840s. Governor General. Constitution said could be Norwegian or Swedish.
Norwegians wanted the post abolished entirely. King Carl V promised in 1859, but the Swedish Riksdag objected and the king backed down, caused huge resentment in Norway.
Storting protested Swedish interference in Norwegian affairs, also protested Riksdag proposal to revise constitution, expand joint council scope, increase Swedish power, seen as violating equality.
Another union committee proposed a new union council. Common ministers, common constitution overriding separate ones. Broad common sphere.
Storting mostly resisted, but worryingly, 17 members voted for it, seen as some officials potentially willing to compromise now.
King Oscar II took throne in 1872. Initially made concessions, customs reform 1874, common Scandinavian currency 1875, gained some favor.
But tensions flared again in 1880. Bill from 1872 requiring ministers to attend Storting on request. Storting now insisted.
Staying ministry refused, resigned. Then fights over military spending. Government wanted increases. Storting wanted Swiss-style militia. King vetoed militia.
Storting impeached ministers. Convicted. King annulled the verdict. Constant friction over power, sovereignty.
The union was clearly marked by constant friction. Norway defending autonomy, Sweden wanting control. Nobility, veto, foreign representation, persistent conflicts reflecting different national goals, different interpretations of the Union deal.
After the Selmer and Schweigard ministries resigned in 1884, a more radical government under Johan Sverdrup took over.
Made concessions on the veto, but got the king to accept laws on Storting summoning ministers, army reform, expanded suffrage.
But the Union issue exploded again in 1885. Sweden changed its foreign affairs admin unilaterally. No consultation.
King Oscar effectively lost direct control of Union foreign policy. It fell to the Swedish foreign minister, responsible to the Swedish Riksdag.
And since he handled Norwegian foreign affairs too, the Norwegian king's power over Norway's foreign policy basically transferred to the Swedish government.
Huge practical implications, not just symbolic. Foreign policy vital for Norway, a trading nation, much more than agrarian Sweden.
Negotiations started between Sverdrup and Sweden, resulted in the Protocol of May 15, 1885.
Proposed equal numbers of Norwegian-Swedish officials in joint council. Norwegians participate, responsible to Storting. But Norway formally recognizes Swedish leadership in foreign policy.
Ignited outrage in the Storting, forced Sverdrup to resign in 1889. Negotiations halted. Foreign policy control became the insurmountable obstacle.
Sweden's unilateral move was a watershed, showed the power imbalance. Norway, with its trade interests, felt marginalized, vulnerable. The protocol failed because it didn't address the core issue of Norwegian autonomy.
In following elections, both right and left parties focused on foreign policy. Left won, but internal splits stopped them forming a government.
So the right formed the Emil Stang ministry. Fruitless negotiations resumed. Futility became obvious.
New election program, Jan 30th, 1891, demanded a new order, placing more fundamental constitutional responsibility on Norwegian state authorities for diplomacy. Clear demand for more control.
Internal divisions in the left hampered them, but the new platform showed growing consensus for major change.
Left won again. Johannes Steen became PM, directly demanded separate Norwegian foreign minister.
Storting, maybe avoiding immediate crisis, initially just demanded separate Norwegian consulates. Still hugely important for trade and shipping.
June 10, 1892, Storting allocated funds. King Oscar refused sanction, dismissed the Steen ministry, which had a big majority, reappointed Emil Stang, seen as violating parliamentarianism, inflamed tensions.
Focusing on consulates was strategic, vital for protecting economic interests. King's refusal and dismissal challenged Norwegian self-governance, intensified the crisis.
Radicals in Storting pushed through cuts to King's civil list, ministers' salaries in 1893.
Majority set deadline, Jan 1st, 1895, for separate consulates. Allocated funds again.
Swedish government refused separation, used the money for joint consulates anyway. Polarized Norway further. Right sought equality within union. Left saw separation as only solution.
Conservative Stang cabinet failed to win majority in 1894 elections. Left kept narrow majority, 59 versus 55.
Stang resigned Jan 31st, 1895. King Oscar negotiated with left, demanded policy commitments, got none. Refused to accept Stang's resignation, April 3, 1895. Unprecedented.
Heightened opposition from left. Sharp rhetoric. But Stang did get Storting agreement for negotiations with Sweden.
Led to Joint Committee of Agreement, 7 Swedes, 7 Norwegians, November 1895. Stang finally resigned in October. Coalition cabinet under Francis Hegerup formed, representing all parties. A period of deadlock, growing frustration.
This extended deadlock shows the deep tensions. Storting, pushing for control even on consulates, met firm resistance, showed the power imbalance, differing visions. Hegerup coalition was an attempt at consensus, but core issues remained.
Reconciliation proceeded very slowly. 1896, Storting narrowly passed resolution, second time, for purely Norwegian flag. King Oscar refused sanction again.
Storting narrowly rejected restoring King civil list. Narrowly approved participating in Stockholm exhibition.
Trade agreement with Japan sparked claims Hegerup favored Swedish interests. Narrowly approved.
Interestingly, conservatives usually want military spending. Liberals oppose. Opposite in Norway, then. Hegerup's proposals to strengthen army weren't just accepted. Funding was increased by Storting. Growing fear of conflict with Sweden.
Despite Union tensions, some domestic progress. 1896-97. Voting rights extended to Norwegians abroad. Local suffrage broadened significantly, but not for women.
Law passed imposing fines for ignoring Storting summons, except royals. King had vetoed it in 1894, sanctioned it now. Law passed closing businesses on holidays, amendment to workers' accident insurance. Domestic policy moved forward somewhat.
The narrow votes showed deep divisions, but increased military spending underscores growing anxiety about Sweden. Passage of other laws shows domestic life continued despite the Union focus.
1897 Storting elections. Decisive left victory. 79 seats versus 35 for right. Gave left majority for constitutional revision, impeachment.
First result, Hegerup ministry resigned. February 18, 1898, radical cabinet formed under former PM Steen.
Significant electoral reform 1898. Increased voters from 6% 1880s and 11% 1897 to 20% immediately.
March 1898, Swedish-Norwegian Committee reported no agreement. Swedes insisted on joint foreign minister. Norwegians split. Moderates accept temporary joint consuls, transition later. Radicals, boosted by election win, want separate foreign minister and consuls immediately.
November 1898, Storting passed flag law for the third time. King Oscar refused sanction again.
But now, passed by 3 successive Stortings, it became law without royal approval under Norwegian constitution. Huge symbolic win.
Norwegian Council of State advised King against undermining his authority on a symbolic issue. King stubbornly refused, arguing Union flag was initially popular.
Feb 15, 1899, Crown Prince Gustav announced joint delegate for Hague Peace Conference against Storting's wish for separate representation.
Gustav got hostile reception in Christiania. Enthusiastic welcome back in Stockholm showed the public divide. Struggle wasn't just governments, but peoples largely united behind their respective positions.
May 1899, Storting unanimously approved extraordinary 11.5 million kroner for Army Navy. No debate needed, signal of potential conflict. May 11th, King Oscar resumed direct control from Crown Prince, escalating tensions towards turn of century.
Left's 1897 win showed strong public mandate for autonomy. Flag law passing without sanction was significant. Contrasting receptions for Gustav vividly showed the widening chasm.
Early 1905, Hegerup, PM since 1903, resigned. Christian Michelsen succeeded him.
May 1905, new electoral law. Direct elections, single-member constituencies, Storting size up from 114 to 123. Though division wasn't proportional, favored smaller towns having own rep. Christiania, 200K plus, got only 5 reps.
Early 1905, King Oscar ill. Crown Prince Gustav, unpopular in Norway, became regent.
Storting passed law for separate foreign ministry and consulates. Regent Gustav refused sanction.
Michelsen ministry resigned. Regent tried, failed to form new government, refused to accept Michelsen's resignation, full-blown constitutional crisis.
Situation critical. Consulates law seen as fundamental for Norway's economy. Regent's refusal to sanction, then refusal to accept resignation, directly challenged parliament, set stage for confrontation.
Then June 7, 1905, unanimous Storting resolution, union with Sweden dissolved.
But wanting to avoid war, Storting, except 4 social democrats wanting a republic, asked King Oscar to let a younger son take Norwegian throne.
Resolution stated, ministry resigned, king can't form new government, constitutional royal power ceased function. So, Storting entrusts resigned ministry to temporarily wield royal power, govern based on constitution, with necessary changes due to union ending.
Simultaneously, address sent to King Oscar emphasize Norwegian view of union, solidarity more valuable than political ties, union became a danger, stressed no hostility to Swedes or dynasty, hoped for peaceful cooperation, friendly relations.
Proclamation to Norwegian people hoped for peace, harmony, especially with Sweden. Ministry address told King his duty was constitutional government. His obstruction meant Norwegian royal power ceased function. Policy on consuls incompatible with constitution, no other government would take responsibility.
King Oscar formally protested. Violation of constitution. Active union needed specific process to revoke. Refused to let son take throne.
Norway countered. King violated constitution first by refusing sanction, dismissing ministry, failing to form new one, acting without responsible minister's countersignature.
King messaged Storting president. Acted within rights. Storting committed revolutionary act.
Real risk of war initially. Provisional government under Michelsen prepared energetically. King's name dropped from church services. Justice in name of provisional government. Army swore allegiance. Norwegians in joint diplomatic service resigned, except U.S. envoy.
Provisional government set up foreign ministry, but couldn't appoint consuls yet. Needed recognition. June 20th, Swedish Riksdag met. Swedish PM stated force not in Sweden's interest. Favored negotiation.
War danger receded. Norwegian provisional government decided on referendum unprecedented for public support. Passionate campaign followed. Referendum, August 13th, 1905. Pivotal moment.
June 7th, 1905. Profound date. Unilateral dissolution, while legally contentious, reflected overwhelming desire for independence. Referendum provided undeniable popular mandate, strengthened negotiating position.
Referendum result, overwhelming, 321,197 for dissolution, only 161 against, 81% turnout.
August 31st, Swedish-Norwegian delegate conference began. Agreement reached. Norway dismantles some border fortifications.
Caused some dissatisfaction among Storting radicals, but Karlstad Convention, ratified by majorities in both parliaments, came into force.
Union resolved. Next question. Monarchy or republic? Lively debate. Social Democrats, radicals favored republic.
Ray argued for monarchy, constitution already republican in nature. King, hereditary head with limited power. Crucially, King, as Prince Karl of Denmark, brings international connections, alliances, might avoid isolation.
That last point seemed decisive. Storting and people, in another referendum, chose monarchy, elected Prince Karl of Denmark as King Haakon VII.
November 1905, PM Michelsen proposed King's civil list, 700,000 kroner for entire reign, previously annual. Far left opposed doubling amount and long-term fix, but approved by large majority, 100 versus 11, final steps to independent nation.
Overwhelming referendum support gave legitimacy to negotiate separation. Debate on government form, choosing monarchy under Haakon VII was pragmatic, prioritizing international recognition, stability.
Internationally, independence secured by Christiania Convention, signed by 4 major powers, respected borders, guaranteed territorial integrity, crucial for sovereign status.
That convention marked formal international acceptance, provided security, solidified Norway's position.
Looking ahead briefly, Norway endured WWII, then became founding NATO member in 1949. Active role ever since.
Armed forces. Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Air Force, Home Guard. Notably, introduced conscription for women in 2014, shows ongoing commitment to defense, international cooperation.
Post-independence history shows strong commitment to multilateralism, cooperation, especially security. Reflects strategic location, democratic values.
Okay, let's turn to the people. Population now, 2024 estimate, around 5.6 million. Very low density, 14.4 per square kilometers. One of Europe's least densely populated.
Right, largely due to the rugged terrain we discussed, but population isn't evenly spread.
No, definitely not. Over a fifth are in the south, around Oslofjord and Trondheimsfjord. Over 80% live in southern, western, eastern Norway combined. Nearly half in eastern Norway alone.
Highly urbanized too, about 78% in urban areas. Over a fifth just in greater Oslo.
Urban area defined as over 200 people, houses within 50 meters. Highest density is Oslofjord region, over 1,400 per square kilometers.
Other big cities: Bergen, Trondheim, Stavanger, Kristiansand, Fredrikstad, Tromsø, Drammen. Concentration in southeast reflects milder climate, easier terrain, economic hubs.
Common trend in developed nations, driven by climate, terrain, historical economy, administration centers.
Age and gender structure: mostly working age, 1667. Slight majority of men overall.
But reverses in older groups. Women become majority from 55, 59 onwards. Common pattern in northern countries. Why is that?
Primarily differences in life expectancy. Globally, women tend to live longer, reflected in demographics of many developed nations like Norway.
Ethnic composition, 2021. 74.77% ethnic Norwegians, 25.23% immigrants and descendants, 1.36 million people.
Among foreign-born, 40% from Europe, Poles, Lithuanians, Albanians largest. North America, Australia, 60% from Asia, Africa, Somalis, Arabs, Pakistanis, Vietnamese, Filipinos, Sri Lankans, significant.
Plus indigenous minorities. 40,000 Sami, Samian, though hard to count precisely. Covans, Norwegian Finns, Roma, a big shift towards diversity recently.
Indeed. From very homogenous to multicultural, driven by recent immigration. Brings cultural richness, perspectives, but also integration challenges, opportunities.
Historically homogenous, but 1980s, more liberal immigration policy, partly due to worries about aging population economics.
Early 21st century saw more refugees, immigrants from less developed countries, shaped current multicultural character.
Interestingly, government policies to attract labor to northern counties resulted in quite high immigrant inflow there.
Despite rising immigration, 31,506 in 2010, still positive net migration. Internal migration is significant too between municipalities, counties. Intermunicipal rate twice as high. General trend north-northwest toward southeast.
Significant groups. Pakistani Norwegians, largest non-European minority, mostly Oslo. Increasing numbers from Iraq, Somalia. Wave from Central Northern Europe, Poland, Sweden, Lithuania, after 2004 EU expansion. And Russian refugees, early 20th century. Complex factors driving migration.
Norway's experience shows global interconnectedness, factors driving movement. Government actively shaping policy for labor needs is notable. Internal migration reflects economic shifts, lifestyle choices.
Language. Official language is Norwegian, but loads of dialects, some mutually unintelligible.
Germanic origin, close to Danish, Swedish, descended from Old Norse.
And Northern Sami is co-official in parts of Troms and Finnmark, recognizes indigenous rights. Other Sami languages historically present too. Dialect diversity reflects geography, isolation.
Absolutely. Rugged geography preserved dialect diversity. Sami co-official status acknowledges linguistic diversity, indigenous rights.
The two written standards, Bokmål and Nynorsk, are fascinating, unique story.
Bokmål, book language, evolved from Danish use during Danish rule, 1397 to 1814.
Late 19th century reaction against it led to Landsmål, country language, or Nynorsk, New Norwegian, created by Ivar Eisen.
Based it on rural dialects aiming for more authentic Norwegian, drawing on Old Norse too.
Both official today. But Bokmål, much more widely used, 85 to 90%. Nynorsk, commonest in Vestlandet, Western Norway, 87% speakers. More rural generally.
Early 20th century, official convergence policy, tilnærmingspolitikken, tried to merge them into Samnorsk. Highly controversial, abandoned 1966.
2005, Kaven language, Finnish immigrant descendants, mainly north, recognized as national minority language. Two standards reflect different views on identity, heritage.
Unique feature tied to Sedri culture. Bokmål's dominance reflects history, demographics. Nynorsk, important symbol of regional diversity, heritage, Espo West. Failed convergence policy shows strong attachments to each form. Kaven recognition further emphasizes diversity commitment.
Religion. Christianity most prevalent. Church of Norway, Evangelical Lutheran State Church. 68.1% members in 2020.
Other groups. Muslims, 3.4%. Catholics, 3.1%. Other Christians, 3.8%. Other religions, 9.6%. Non-religious, 15.4%.
Church of Norway formally separated from state in 2012. Big step.
Constitution still guarantees religious freedom, but says evangelical Lutheranism is state religion. King and half of ministers must be Lutheran.
High nominal membership, 75% in 2014, but low regular attendance, 2%. Membership often default if parent is member. Many immigrant groups also Christian. Poles, Sami, Swedes, Germans, Lithuanians, Danes, Russians, Serbs, Finns. Various Christian councils exist.
2007, 8.6% belong to other faiths. Largest, Islam, 1.09%, Catholic Church, 1.1%, Pentecostal, 0.86%. Also registered neo-pagan community, Forningen Foreign said. Increasingly diverse landscape, though still mostly Christian historically.
Reflects historical roots and increasing diversity from immigration. Church-state separation modernized relationship while acknowledging historical significance. Low active participation despite high membership is common in secular West. Growing non-religious other faiths shows evolving society.
Okay, brief outline of administrative divisions. As of Jan 1st, 2024, 15 fylker, counties, provinces, subdivided into 357 municipalities, kommuner, often grouped into 5 unofficial regions: Nord North, Trøndelag Central, Vestland West, Østland East, Sørland South. Listed the fylker and centers earlier.
Each fylke is a fylkeskommune, county municipality, admin level between state and local communer. 422 total commuter now.
Total area. Continental, 323,786 square kilometers. With Svalbard, Jan Mayen, 385,207 square kilometers.
King represented in each fylke by governor, statsforvalter. Elected county assembly, fylkesting. Executive county council, fylkesutvalg.
Cities have elected city councils by bystyrer, executive city councils by byråd with burgomaster, councillors, rådmen. Municipalities similar, municipal councils, kommunstyrer. Executive municipal councils, kommunalråd with rådmen. Multi-tiered structure balances national and local.
Highlights commitment to local self-governance representation. Fylker and communer deliver services, implement policy locally. Structure evolved balancing central authority, local needs, democracy.
And finally, state structure, very briefly. Constitutional monarchy, unitary government.
King Harald V, current monarch, largely ceremonial head of state.
Real executive power with government, led by Prime Minister, currently Jonas Garster.
Legislature is the Storting Parliament. Current President Masoud Gharkhani blends monarchy with strong parliamentary democracy.
Exactly. Strong emphasis on democratic principles. Elected parliament holds significant power, oversees executive. Monarch, symbolic, represents continuity, unity.
Okay, wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered Norway's stunning geography, ice, mountains, coast, traced its history, independence, unions, independence again, explored its people from homogeneous to multicultural, unique language situation, evolving religion, structured governance.
Fascinating example of a nation shaped by geography and a history of external influence versus persistent self-determination and cultural preservation.
So a final thought for you. How does a nation with such deep roots and strong identity handle globalization and multiculturalism today? How does the Viking legacy still echo in modern values? And what can Norway's complex history of unions and peaceful separation teach us about national identity and international relations now?
Lots to think about. Norway's story is a rich case study, geography, history, culture, politics, all interacting. Offers valuable insights into how a modern nation-state forms and evolves.
Until our next deep dive, stay curious.